I grew up in the Eastern Cape, and I grew up around a cricket field. And there were times when I was at boarding school in the Eastern Cape, and I used to come home to a farm near River, and I used to love coming home. It was just the holiday times were about exploring sports, play, and I believe in exploring as much as you can when you're young before you try and become accurate at something. And somebody close to me reminded me that play was my rehearsal for life. Recently, we went for a run in the nearby forest plantation, and we came across the group of moms and their kids. And the kids were just playing in the forest, building forts, working ways how to build a fort in the zone, total free play, and no recollection of time. And this reminds me of a batsman by the name of Matthew Hayden, who was international star for Australia. And he was an opening batsman trying to close out play. Now, in other words, as an opening batsman, you've been batting for 4 or 5 hours and you want to get to the end of the day. It's funny as a batsman, it's like going to bed at night knowing that you're going to come back and bat the next day. Is that degree of certainty that you don't ever get as a batsman. So anyway, he was trying to close out this day's play, and he turned around to look for the umpire to take his position in crease, and there was no umpire, and the fielders had left the field. So in other words, he had no recollection of time. He was joyfully experiencing what he was doing. And Gary Kirsten, in a recent course, was explaining to us how we as coaches have got to try and find ways in which you can help players lock into the joy of what they're doing. And then as we go up, there's a scoreboard, and somebody's keeping score. And that idea of producing an outcome and that expectation of closing out a day's play, it begins to trip us up. And like life trips us up, sometimes we can trip ourselves up. I remember as a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old playing in a rugby match against another school in a derby. It was one of those morning games. And as we know, there's always a bit of dew around. And I was asked to come and kick the conversion at the score that it was at 10-all, and it was the last play of the day. And all I can remember at those days, it was a drop goal. And all I remember is being on my backside. But that's all I do remember, was being on my backside. I remember being on 99 once, facing Lance Klusner at St. George's Park, trying to get to 100. And he squeezed me and I couldn't find any runs. I found a way to get out. And then recently, a friend of mine reminded me that we had put together a partnership of 441, the two of us. It's just wonderful how cricket is such an individual thing. You can feel alone out there, but it's important not to feel lonely. And me and my mate were trying to create this big milestone, which we had. He had got to his double 100, and he was trying to get me to my double 100. And I found a way to get out in 196. So he does tease me regularly about that. But as with cricket, you've got to be creative. I think that milestones and sets are such a big part of the game, and people are recognized anyway for those milestones. But I've been involved in cricket teams where batsman number 1 to 4 bat and bowl, and number 5 is the wicketkeeper also bats. So there are very many people in the team that don't get an opportunity. For instance, that number 9 player who is coming to bat number 9 might not get a chance to bat. We need to find ways to reward behaviours around these players. So in other words, if that batsman at number 9 has dived on the pitch, grazed his elbows, dirtied his clothes, that he's the one that stops the run, that gets the wicket. And we need to celebrate that effort, that value, that behaviour. So this comes from a coach by the name of Paddy Upton, who's worked with South Africa, and he's worked many seasons in the RPL. And he talks about what's important now. In other words, being in the present moment, enabling our players to be present, and us as coaches giving them presence. So it's so easy for our ego to get caught up in what we're trying to do. So in other words, a past experience that maybe hurt us, or the expectation of something in the future. And the ego does not know how to operate in the present moment. And it's such a skill to be able to be in that present moment. So this learning circle, which I think helps with that, is the players play their match on a Saturday, they reflect, then they plan, and then they practice. But unfortunately, us as moms and dads and as coaches, we're so invested in our children's success. We want them to make a contribution. So a lot of the times we do the reflecting and the planning, and we interrupt their full cycle of learning. We must understand that when these players are playing against each other, there's a 13-year-old versus a 13-year-old. They're not playing against professional athletes. So I found that those teams that have got players in who are able to reflect and plan for themselves are the ones that go out there better equipped against another 14-year-old or against another 16-year-old. And make smarter and wiser choices. So how do we equip the players with those skills to be able to cope with these pressure moments? That we can put those performances and in so-called winning. So when we're trying to explore and to discover these skills, we try and talk into a player how to do something. But sport is all about feeling. So we've got to find ways that the way we are thinking connects with the way a player is feeling. So to do that, they've got to discover for themselves how to place a ball in different places. So it's a lot of repetitions, and it takes time. But when that self-discovery through exploration, it's so delightful to see when these kids go, they just look at you and they go, how did I do that? Through those repetitions, and they discover it for themselves. So 2 stories. I grew up facing fast bowling as a first-class batsman, likes of these guys like Dale Steyn and Mackay and Tini. And you have to be in a sort of a boxer type mentality. You've got to be up for the fight. So I thought when I left playing cricket that I needed to coach young cricketers into how to face fast bowling. And I think I overstepped the mark sometimes. And they felt it was a bit uncomfortable for them, ball around the head, and there was a bit too much fear. So that was good learning for me. And then as a young or an under 14B rugby coach, we sometimes get these athletes that we know we're not going to have at the end of the year because they progress and they develop and they end up playing for the A team. But there was one guy I could just see he was going to excel in rugby later on in life. And I said to him, you're going to play first team rugby one day. And 5 years after school, his mom came to me and he said that his son had written that note and put it in his pocket and played every rugby match as a junior right through, and obviously his games in first team. So two examples of messages trying to connect with players that obviously I felt one was connecting and it wasn't, and the other I didn't even know would connect, and it did. So I think you've just got to be mindful at how we are connecting with players. You'll see they're quite renowned players there. Shane Warne, bowling, Chashin Chandukar, he's the batsman, with Adam Gilchrist, the keeper, and Mark Walls at slip. So over time, we collect all this information and then sort of we saw it to try and respond or react in the moment. And say, for instance, I'm a batsman that starts to lose form, and because that's now a thing that's going to sit in my mind, I start to change the way I'm going to bat. And in essence, it's something in my mind that's caused that. So if you look at those players, I'm going to try and demonstrate to you now, if I am receiving a tennis ball, I'm going to stand in this position. If I'm going to make a tackle in rugby, I'm going to stand in this position. Probably a boxer, something like that. And what we do when we bat, we actually stand in that position and then we bat. So our eyes are level, we've got some arc in our back, and we're almost on the balls of our feet. So you'll see all those players at the time of Shane Warne releasing, they're all in their balls of their feet, ready to react. And it's amazing how the mind starts to interfere with that. But when we were young, that's the first thing we would have done. Again, as we get on through life and we're supporting our kids, it's tough to watch our kids and trying to encourage them to make a contribution. So us as moms and dads and as coaches, I encourage us sometimes to take our child's cap off and put the team's cap on. It's a tough thing to do because we feel like we want to be in control of when that moment will come for our kids. And we must understand that you'll see that clock does not have a time on there. We don't know when a team's clock will be striking or when a player's clock will be striking. So we don't have that certainty. So it's important to go to your sports matches and enjoy the team's performance. And once the children and teams have got the right behaviors, the right values, and you're celebrating those things, you'll find the players in the team learn how to take turns in making contributions. So if I'm going through a bad catch as a sportsman, I almost get excited because I know it's my turn next. But building that in a dressing room it's gold and it takes time. And then the bottom, Kane Williamson, as a successful opening batsman for New Zealand, incredible player. And he was getting interviewed after an innings, and you could see the interviewer was trying his or her best to almost have Kane acknowledge his stats in his career. And he wouldn't go there. And all his response was, "They're not my runs anyway. They're the team's." And that is from one of the best players in the world. This comes from a friend of mine, Chris Ekron. He talks about the 4 pieces of a cricket ball. This reminds me that whenever we're trying to coach, we must remember that holistic approach, the physical development, psychological development, academics, and social. And we are so quick sometimes to dump our emotions on a performance of a team, and that's the thing. So we must be very careful about our voice and understand that it either comes from a place of fear or a place of love. And if you think of John Wooden, who's a renowned basketball coach, probably one of the best in the US for a number of years, he always mentions that when he had success with teams, it was those players that were doing it the same on the field or on the court and off the court. T20 cricket, we all know about it, and it's done a wonderful thing for cricket, created longevity in the game for all formats of the game. But the one thing we must learn and remember that those outcomes that we would like to achieve are always achieved in the midday sun. So the ideas of endurance and perseverance are key. What I've sort of noticed, and because I've got a family member trying to make it in the rugby career, is that once, and in grade 12, the children are really exposed to lock now. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on TV and there's a lot of pressure. And I think after school, when they try and make it at the sport, there's not as much limelight around them in their first year. And we've got a lot of people not playing sport after school for the right reasons, like community, teamwork, connection. And they sort of lost touch with the playfulness of sport. So my ask is to almost look at winning in that regard as opposed to the outcomes. So this is a player that's come through through me at some stage. His name's Chris Benjamin, doing well overseas. And a lot of those type of players like a Chris Benjamin who are self-driven. They come to nets and they are there because they want to be there. Self-driven to be there, not because I want them to be there. The quote at the bottom actually comes from a coach by the name of John Anyumbu, who's Zimbabwean, who's coaching in England. He says the lessons from last week are the solutions for this week. And that is what we need to win at. And I'm working with a player now that some people in the room will know, and he does that. He literally comes there every time, driven to find ways and explore. And we as coaches have almost got to get out of the way and allow that to happen. We're responsible for facilitating the learning and the environment, but we don't want to get in the way of the player. So sometimes I feel like I'm just a messenger, and I think sometimes we can get caught up in the person delivering the message, but more importantly, it's the message. We sometimes will make mistakes. We're not human doings. We are human beings. And hopefully, us as moms or dads or as coaches, we found that opportunity to leave a message in someone's pockets that they use one day in their lives going forward to build the right habits, the right values, and celebrate the right things going forward.